Everybody, hello Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I just finished a great game of chess. I went to 44 moves where my opponent resigned, if I have that right. Uh, let's take a look here. Start out in review, and usually I drift towards analysis, and that's fine. I had the white pieces. My first king's pawn opening of the day. I've been playing a lot of queen's pawns opening and having good results with it. Almost great results with it. I decided to go back to my usual e4. So e4, e5, knight f3, d6. The Philidor defense. I like to open things up with d4 here as white, and after after e takes d4, knight takes d4. Just a note here: queen takes d4 is totally playable. It leads to a different situation altogether, and black will often play knight to c6 to develop, while also moving the queen away from this fine central square that she has temporarily found herself. Knight takes d4, knight c6. It's tempting here. You might go for doubling the pawns on black's queen side. They're not all that bad as doubles, right? If the c7, d6, and c5 kind of form this issue on the C file and the D file. So I don't recommend forcing those doubles. It's not a bad idea. It's just I like this sort of semi Maroczy bind structure. This resembles a Maroczy bind to some extent. Get the C pawn out there influencing things early. Queen f6, bishop e3, knight e5. Knight e5 is flagged as inaccurate. I don't know, maybe black wants to develop a piece, but then he stifled his own knight's progress a bit by the queen's placement at f6, and his own dark squared bishop is being blocked by pawn at d6. I think perhaps for that reason, black sort of goes to a different move, make more active or make issue out of the pieces that are on the board. The problem is black's not developed yet. It's early. It's too early. White has as much development. Uh, Also considering that white's queen is pretty much developed right here on her starting square. If you look at all the range she covers already on the board. So yeah, I'm a little bit critical of knight e5. Knight c3, c6, bishop e2. White is now strong on the d1 to h5 diagonal, the battery of queen and bishop controlling those squares. And bishop e2 also helps control the fantastic knight at e5. I call it fantastic, but I just said that black should be developing another piece. Well, guess what? At the cost of developing a piece, yeah, the knight's fantastic right here in the center of the board, but you can't neglect your development like that. So that's really the bigger issue. But the knight is fantastic on e5. I'll have to, exactly how is white gonna deal with ridding that knight, or all those kinds of things. That being said, even to double back on my analysis again, uh, the pawn can kick him. Pawn to f4. Got two knights that can eventually maneuver so as to unseat this strong knight. We've got a dark squared bishop, so it's not going to be there for the whole game. It'll just be there for a little while. White castles kingside. I had thought of moves that would allow me to castle queenside. Maybe it was just a little too slow after pawn to g3 and a move like queen to c2 and then castles queenside. I might have given black enough time to put forth an attack. castles, king side was not my best move. Okay, that happens. People make mistakes. Bishop e7. Bishop h5. Let's go to the analysis window. We're being aided by Stockfish18, who asserts that f4 and king h1 were strong. f4. I played bishop h5, and after bishop g4, found the correct continuation. I thought this was correct. It's not. I should be capturing on g4, and then either queen or knight recaptures. Let's see what's the big deal about that though. Knight takes g4, bishop f4, queen f6. So the computer move suggested was bishop f4 against the f6. And now white can poach this pawn. Is that correct? Queen to a4. Bishop g3. Queen b3. This is rather involved. Yeah, this is kind of involved. So in a blitz game, bishop takes g6, bishop takes d1, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, rook at a takes d1, and white has gone up a pawn. Well, it wasn't quite as exact as the computer variation. It looks pretty lengthy and drawn out, complicated and such. Sometimes the case with computer variations. That's for a large part of the reason that they are stronger than humans at chess. Pawn to h6. This is slow. This is too slow. This is a moment where, with white ahead of pawn, black needs to develop the knight to f6 like really badly, or maybe bishop to f6 and then knight to e7. But black does not have time to play h6 here. I'm critical of this move, and it's nice to see that the engine Stockfish 18 is as well. It took time here to shore up my pawn base on the light colors here, stemming from the flank towards the center. Knight f6, knight f5, rook d8. Just some building moves. I'll get rid of the dark squared bishop for my knight, even though he's well placed and all, but the long range piece while we're this close to the end game is valuable. The board is a little bit cluttered, right? There are more pawns than not, or more pawns than sometimes. Still, I'm not all that happy about, I don't want to miss the opportunity, rather. I don't want to miss the opportunity to capture on e7 and nab Black's long-range minor piece. Not only that, it's also a forcing sequence. Black doesn't capture, is going to be out of piece, right? And after the recapture, White grabs a full pawn on a7. So for that reason, being up 2 pawns rather than 1 sounded pretty good to me. And White is doing very well here. Bishop to d4, pawn to c5, bishop takes f6 check, knight takes f6. It's a, you would describe this position, I describe this position, calm. This is a cool, calm position. There's no huge fireworks going on. We have to know strategically what White aims are or should be. Trading off a minor piece, the last 2 minor pieces on the board, one for White, one for Black, sounds like a good idea to me. It sounds like a good idea to me. And White will have 2 extra pawns in a double rook endgame for as long as that lasts. Really strong pawn chain is nice here. It's not great that a2 is exposed on the a file, the half open a file, but White has a ton of ways to correct that. Rook d2, rook a1, and pawn to a4 show that keeping this pawn on the board can be done flexibly by White. Rook to e1, and we've got a strong presence on the center file, which is good. My opponent is going to contest that, of course. I thought king to f1 was a nice way to say, hey, I'm okay with this position. We could lose both rooks, and I'll still be okay with this position, having majority on both sides. So my opponent was wise to resist the trade of rooks. It doesn't escape from it, right? I could just take capture on e5, but at least this, has hints of other ideas. Rook to d3 is strong, and then the point of all this I was keeping in mind was a4. Whoops, if I throw this check in first. Rook to f3 check, and then grab the rook, even if it now makes an Isolani over Black's pawn at e5. Then finally, after some of the tactics have wrapped up here, playing pawn to a4, showing that all the while rook a8 looked strong, all the while White has a well-balanced and well-defended queen side. Not only that attack is over, my opponent goes to the e file. I'll bring my king out now because Black's king is totally cut off. The rook is doing well controlling the open f file. Black's king is cut off from the action, so we'll get our king to e2 and then probably e3, be really active and take away one of Black's trumps. Black's trumps was he had the more active king. that's not going to be the case for very long. King to e3. I just throw a check in here. I didn't have to, but I'm eyeing this pawn on g7. It's not the only way to go about it. It's one good way to go about it. We would think here with white to move that king to e4, I would say, so it shows just a little bit more restraint. And then what do we know if pawn to g6, robbing white of the f5 square. So who knows? This pawn is also shielding white from its own side's attack. Rook g3 check, king f5, captures on g7. White is ahead a ton of pawns, and it's not clear that black can make any progress with this pawn on e5. b6 to push the pawn to safety, at least for the time being. And the logical attack, rook to b7, also will claim the pawn because there's no safe way to protect b6 on the e-file. We'll get nabbed by my d5 pawn, d takes e5. Other moves are just obviously out. Pushing forward, and I can have the luxury of choosing to capture on the b file. Okay. I might be going in a little bit extra depth here. Sorry about that. Look, the point is, we're going to close down black's options and pick off pawns here and there, while trying to keep my king relatively safe. There's no way to stop a8 at this point, so a8 equals queen, and just checkmate from there. Don't stalemate your opponent, kind of thing. And I played queen to h5. I actually won via timeout. I have this version of the same game with a different end, starting about here instead of wherever I played on the previous game, like to the file for the check. I said, well, we can take away black's retreat on h3 with queen c8 check, and then the checkmate comes a little bit sooner. And how fittingly with pawn to h4 checkmate. That's great. Pawns don't deliver checkmate all that often, so I like that. It's rare and it's kind of cute. It's one way for the game to finish. And in either way, the way it really was, or with the pawn delivering checkmate, both sides played strong, accurate games. I really think neither my opponent nor I have anything to hang our heads about. I'm glad to have won a well-contested game against a good opponent. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.